2024 Black History Month. The topic today is African Americans' role in the Civil War. I want to run out a little bit of Charleston trivia for everybody. What is the size of a football field and a half? Do you know what has now located on Gadsden's Wharf in Charleston? What has 9 galleries that people can just walk through and just admire and get involved in history? Who has a Center for Family History that provides educational programs for visitors, both young and old? Think about who might have membership opportunities. And all of those answers, if you don't hear some of them tonight or this afternoon, will be on the main website, which you see is https://IAAmuseum.org. And you can also look for the future presentations coming up under events. If not, all of your answers will be there. So, what do you know about the Center for Family History? I'm showing this slide, and it shows that there's a resource center, digital archives. You can contribute information, and also there's one-on-one genealogy consultations that we offer. And again, just go to the page website there, Center for Family History, for more information. Few reminders while we're here for this webinar. This session is being recorded and will be available at a later date. We have a YouTube channel and that'll be placed up there. So please mute yourself and turn off your video during the discussion or presentation, whichever one that we're airing. Closed caption is available, whoever wants it. And if you have questions, please use the Q&A box, and questions will be responded to after the panelist discussion. My name is Dr. Shelley Murphy, and I'm going to be your moderator today. And I want to welcome our guests. Both of them are friends of mine in the genealogy world. And one is Nicka Sewell-Smith. You can see her website. One of her pages covered on the website because it's a video that's going through. And that is Who is Nicka Smith? And we'll hear a little bit more about her and what she's doing. And then we have Darius Brown, and he is the new author of At the Feet of the Elders and one of the resident research assistants at the Center for Family History. So again, we have Whitney Day that will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. And again, we will be attending to them as soon as we're done. All right, so Miss Smith, introduce yourself, tell us what's going on in your world, and then I'll pass it over to Darius.
Oh, well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are at. I am here in lovely West Tennessee, not far from Memphis. Well, how am I showing up today? Well, I am the great-great-great-granddaughter of King and Rachel Atlas, the great-great-granddaughter of King and Alice Atlas, the great-granddaughter of Louis Atlas and Susie Atlas, the granddaughter of Annie Atlas, the daughter of Barbara Sewell and Nicka Smith. That's who I am today. And I specifically chose that lineage because there is someone super important in the chat that is here with us live that I have to give deference to my elders. I would not know a lion's share of what I know about the history of African Americans in Carroll and East Carroll Parish if it were not for the incredible work done by Cleo Scott Brown, whose father was the other person who testified in front of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission with my uncle in 1960 in New Orleans. And so I have to give her deference. She is a resident of Charleston. Library, please reach out to Ms. Cleo and have her come and speak because she's incredible. And her book is called Witness to the Truth, My Struggle for Human Rights in Louisiana. It's incredible. And I have such a huge debt to her. So I have to give her deference for being here.
Absolutely. Welcome, Cleo Brown. And yes, we'll be in touch. All right, Darius Brown, kind of introduce yourself, tell us what you're doing. And I mentioned that you are the newest author out on the street right now about the At the Feet of the Elders. And we are so happy and so proud of the work that you have done. So go for it.
All right. I'm glad to be here today. So good morning or good evening to everyone. And so I'm Darius Brown. I'm one of the research assistants in the Center for Family History. And I am a descendant of a plethora of Union soldiers. I have about 7 direct ancestors that served in the Civil War and about 23 cousins and uncles. And so this is a good topic that I like to talk about because it is one of my interests, and I've been doing this research for 7 years now, and so I'm happy to be here today with you guys.
Okay. And Whitney, if you'll come on camera and at least say hi so people know you're here and not just your name there. And even though I know you'll come back at the end when we're doing the Q&A. So appreciate you being here and taking your time and helping us out. All right. So we have questions, and this is for the audience. And they will also, our guests will also share some slides of information. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A so we don't lose track of them. So one of the first questions I'm going to throw out, and could you elaborate on the various roles of African Americans played during the Civil War beyond being soldiers? You know, such as the laborers, the spies, the nurses, or how these roles were probably crucial to the Union's victory. And Nicka, I'll start with you, and then we'll turn it over to Darius.
I honestly think we haven't truly fleshed out all of the roles. I think we know certain ones, like the very obvious ones that have been couched in with legislation, like the U.S. colored troops, or even the cooks, maids, matrons, which that role in particular was obscured for a number of years, and people were not actively thinking about that. Definitely have to get a shout out to Angela Walton Raji for being one of the individuals who brought that story to the fore. But I think the multitude of ways that African Americans served in the war, again, it's not, I don't even think we really truly know the half. And one of the reasons why I don't think we know the half is because if you spend any time in genealogy and family history, or even just have an active interest in the Civil War, you recognize that there is still so much that's not digitized and available from home for us to view. And that is kept in archives that folks just, they just haven't seen, accounts that they haven't read. And so, beyond the obvious, beyond the soldiers, the number of spies, I think, is probably vastly underestimated.
Fascinating.
Right. And it's like one of those things, like people who want to know or validate that their ancestors were part of the Underground Railroad. You weren't supposed to know they were in it. So trying to find, documentation of that is going to be extremely hard. So I think the role of spies is understated. I think even some of the battles or skirmishes, things that did not make it onto sites like the Civil War Service System, those lower level things that happened that you only kind of find out about through personal accounts of folks who were alive at the time. There's one of the the Pioneer Paper interviews in the Indian Territory that I've read through, right, where one of the Cherokee freedmen was talking about getting this land and finding like shells in the soil as he was trying to till it. And naturally you're like, well, what's going on in this place? So again, to reinforce the point, I think the roles are understated. But for those of us who are super interested in finding our family's connection to it, the primary ways are likely going to be through the U.S. colored troops, through the cooks, maids, and matrons, as well as people who may have been in support roles.
And before I turn this to you, Darius, we've got approximately 200,000 that were involved. So I'm going to make sure the audience got that point. We're not talking about 20 or 30. We're talking about 200,000 in those various roles that I mentioned. And some of them were free and some of them were enslaved. So Darius, your response about the roles?
Yeah, I would like to piggyback what Nicka said. Many of those roles that they played, sometimes they're not documented. And so we're looking for some documentation to say that my ancestor was a spy with this person on the Underground Railroad. We may not even find those type of records. But I do think that it's very interesting that many Black women put their lives on the line for the Black soldiers. And so you have a lot of Black women who were nurses and stuff like that. When many people think of Harriet Tubman, they just think about the Underground Railroad. But she made her way down to Beaufort during the Civil War, and she actually worked inside the contraband hospitals where she was helping men, women, and children, and many of the soldiers who were actually hurt during the war. And so women played a vital role during the Civil War, helping the soldiers receive health services and stuff like that. You also had many of the soldiers who were pilots, and many of us don't even know that there was some Black men who served on the Navy and stuff like that, and they were actually pilots. And one of my relatives, he was actually a pilot on the ship where it was Harriet Tubman and the 2nd South Carolina, and they did a raid on the Combahee River raid, and he was the pilot. And they talk about him in the South Atlantic Blockading Squadron records. And he's like a distant cousin of mine. And so we were much more than just regular soldiers. We did so much more. And sometimes those stories get lost because they weren't always documented, you know?
Right. And
I
so
think
you
that,
bring,
oh, sorry,
go
Shelley.
ahead. I was just going to say he's bringing out some good points, and I want folks to tune in, because when Nicka and Darius are talking, they're giving you tips or hints about records and resources. And so again, I'm a note taker type person, but just tune into some of that. So go ahead, Nicka.
I definitely want to add to what Darius said about the role of the Navy. I think depending on the region that your ancestors were living in, it may have been more likely that your folks enlisted in the Navy as opposed to the U.S. colored troops. And finding records for the U.S. Navy is not a novel task during the Civil War. This U.S. colored troops and the colored infantries and the heavy artilleries, that stuff is way easier to get to than the Navy, because the Navy, you aren't even getting like with the service cards, that's like one of my favorite documents. And I think I can say that I share this with you, Shelley. Like, we love that first service card. Right. The one that's got the age and the height and the weight
Gives
and the
us
birth
the
location.
clues. Yes.
Yeah, it's like clues galore. And then when it gets real good and you get down to the remarks, and it tells you potentially where they were enslaved or who their slaveholder was and the plantation they came off of. But with the Navy, that information is not as readily available. And I think that's also an area that's understudied, because you had, what was it? I think like 18,000 Black men,
18 to 20,000 were
right, who were in the Navy. And again, their roles were different. The fact that the Navy was integrated during the Civil War and then resegregated itself and then reintegrated itself later on. And that there's something to be said about that. The fact that a lot of these men who were on the front lines, they were constantly fighting to be recognized as soldiers, not as slaves who had just been given a gun. There's a big difference between their roles in servitude as opposed to them as soldiers. And the other thing I really want us to all really think critically about is like the motivation that it took to enlist. And the fact that we have scores of Tubman-esque individuals within our own lineages that we are in some ways not honoring, because we don't recognize the sacrifice and the intestinal fortitude, to use a big word, that it took to enlist and to become a part of this effort. I would imagine there's probably scores of folks at the time who were like, I ain't getting in that. That ain't my business. How often do we say that right now?
Think of the fear. And they're been enslaved or even free. The fear of joining in with the Union or doing anything. And so, but some people were running. They were running away to join and serve. But I want to ask you a question, which you're leading right into the next question. But also, do you think those that are running, they saw that dream of freedom? And if they got involved, that there was a chance of being free? What do y'all think?
Well, it was encoded in the legislation. I mean, when you read into the origins of the whole idea of the U.S. color troops, you have to look at the Confiscation Act, you have to look at the Militia Act, and the fact that those two acts are what called for the recruitment and enlistment of Black men, in particular, to be a part of the military. And there was the promise of freedom. When you look at the early advertisements, especially for, one of my favorite units, Darius was talking about, the number of ancestors that he has that have been involved in the Civil War. I have a number of them as well. And my folks are in places that people don't typically research, like Louisiana or Mississippi or the Indian Territory. And when you look at regiments like the 1st Kansas, which predates the 54th Massachusetts. And yes,
Right.
I will always stand up for my boys because they don't ever get enough love from anybody. You look at the advertisements and it clearly states how much they're being paid, the fact that they're guaranteed their freedom, their wife is guaranteed her freedom, their children are being guaranteed their freedom, and their mothers are being guaranteed their freedom. So when they were advertising to recruit people, that was an act of recruitment. Yes, people were fleeing and they were fugitives. We've even talked about how this is the largest fugitive slave revolt in the United States. Technically, it sort of is. But some men, think about it. This might be the first time in their lives they're able to work and keep their own money.
Yeah.
Without a slaveholder's interference. Some states, an enslaved person hires themselves out, the slaveholder gets to keep the profit. In Louisiana, that was not the case. If you worked as an enslaved person, that money was yours. So that also may have been.
That means there's records because we're following the money.
What you said. Yes, ma'am. Come on, Darius, jump in here. You too quiet.
Yes, go ahead. I'm throwing it over to Darius. So do you think those aspirations were there? Even though, but remember, our people can't read and write, a lot of them during this time.
Yeah.
So again, that would have been that, and this is Shelley saying this, the word was spread, and things. So have you seen in your research or any indication from any of the, and we'll talk about pensions in a minute, but any aspirations towards that freedom and why they went to fight or joined in?
Yeah, so at least with my family, you dealing with the Battle of Port Royal. And so these were some of the first African Americans to be freed in November of 1861. And everyone wanted to get to Beaufort. Beaufort was like the place that everyone wanted to be free. And so people from the outskirts, Charleston County, Colleton County, nearby Savannah, people from the mainland, everyone wanted to get to Beaufort so that they can be free. And so if you get to Beaufort, you would be free because the Union Army, they set up their base here. And so everyone wanted to come here. And so with my family, they could have just they could have just said, you know what, we already free. That's good enough. I'm not going, I'm not going to join that war. I'm not ready to potentially to die, and stuff like that. But they went on and they enlisted. And one of the General Major David Hunter, he was like an abolitionist general, and some of them refer to him as Lincoln's abolitionist general. But he promised many of the soldiers that they would be freed. In fact, he passed one of the he passed one of these. Basically, he freed the people in South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. But Lincoln went back and rescinded the order. But he was very, he was very adamant about, letting the soldiers know, hey, I want y'all to be free, and if you can come and fight for me, you will be free. And so many of my ancestors, they went right to these same camps and they enlisted. And so they cared about other people's freedom and not theirs. Because they could have just said, you know what, I'm free. The Union Army is around here. They protecting us. We good.
You're right.
We just wait this out and see what happens. But they say, you know what, I want to go in and enlist. I want to fight for freedom, and I want to fight for everyone else's freedom.
Which also, you got to also think of the families too. So this individual, I'm going to say a man, and there's some women as well, but also it's not just about them. it's also that family and who's behind them, I'm going to say, be it the wife, the children, aunties, mamas, and so forth. So again, the aspiration of free was always there. So Nicka triggered this for the next question, and it's about the challenges. And so we know, a lot of folks that are here listening to this will ask about, is there challenges in doing this type of research? So if each of you will share, some of the significant challenges, number one, that African Americans are going to face while they're researching this era of the Civil War. And are there any limits? Because Nicka, you talked about, both of you said, things just weren't recorded. But for those in the audience, what are some of these other challenges, and where do we go find them?
Well, I think where I would actually like to start with this question is from the vantage point of the fact that Civil War research and military research during the Civil War, for me and my methodology and how I research, is one of the hallmarks of locating a former enslaver. So I don't actually see Civil War regimental, or even veteran research as a challenge at all. I think, again, the level of information and firsthand accounts that you are able to get once a person enters the U.S. military service, in particular during this time period, it's some of the information that people spend years, circling the wagons, trying to find online. I think where the challenge is people learning how to get to the records. It's not necessarily the fact that it's not there or that it was burnt up in a fire. You don't really necessarily deal with that until you start getting into World War I and World War II, and you're dealing with the U.S. Personnel Record Center and that big fire that happened in the 70s in St. Louis. But with the Civil War, one of the things I think most people stop at is they may find their ancestor on the 1890 veteran schedule, and they think that that's it. Or they may find someone that they think is their ancestor on a service card or a muster card, and they don't know that there's an additional step like check to see if they have a pension, the fact that pensions aren't digitized for the most part. There are selected places like the International African American Museum or Fold 3 where you can find selected pensions index, but all of them are not. And so, in my opinion, the challenge is not getting to a veteran, it's finding out all the records and repositories and places where the stuff is, it's connected to them, and how to make sense of all of that.
And you commented about the 1890 veteran schedule, and I'm looking at a census questionnaire thing at a glance, of which I could put in a chat room. But there's other censuses, as just a hint here, that refer to a veteran status. And so again,
1910 is one. But the person had to survive until 1910.
Correct.
And
1930
again,
is another question.
Right. And whoever the enumerator was, we would hope that they asked the person, not the neighbor. Because if me and Darius
or the kid.
Right. If me and Darius were living, and Whitney, all four of us was living next door to each other. Let's say I was not home that day. 1910, they weren't marking who was asking the questions. They could have went by Darius's house and said, was Shelley in the war? And Darius might say, I don't know, maybe. So then they just don't mark the column. But if they came and asked you or asked your wife or asked your kids, there's a higher likelihood that that would be recorded accurately. So even that is not a 100% foolproof thing either.
Correct. But know that question was asked on the veteran schedule 1890 and the 1910 schedule if they survived. Darius, challenges.
Yeah, so with me, I don't want to be a little unrealistic because I know a lot of people have challenges. I didn't have that many challenges because I had so many ancestors that fought in the Civil War.
Yes.
But I know with many people, some people
your internet connection is dragging.
What a pension file is.
Okay. Looks like he froze a little bit. Let me see if
he did.
You were just getting ready to say something about pension records.
Am I good now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you'll repeat what you said.
Okay, what I was saying that some people don't even know what a pension record is.
Mm.
Some people just look at the census, maybe the 1890 census. They, like Nicka said, they see that an ancestor fought in the Civil War and they just leave it at that. They don't look to go to the next step. And so some of the challenges is that people don't know what the record sets are. And then we always think that everything should be done online. It gets to a certain point where researching online is going to take you but so far. And you may have to take that trip to a certain archive and stuff like that. And what I wanted to say is I feel like we do a disservice when we only research our ancestors in a particular community. And
Oh, wait, hold on, Darius.
He got it.
Wait, wait. He got to run that back because I need everybody, all 67 people who's in here watching this live. I need them to hear that. And once he makes his point, I'm gonna add a little yeast on it. Go ahead, Darius. Do it again.
Yeah, I feel like we all do ourselves a disservice when we only want to focus on our ancestors. Sometimes you got to research that neighbor. You got to research everyone in the community.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're not going to have an ancestor that served in the Civil War. And that was my research process. I had figured out that in maybe a 3-mile radius that there was between 100 and 200 soldiers that settled in the area my family was from. And I decided to order their pension files with the hope that one of my relatives testified saying, hey, I knew this person all my life. We were slaves of the same master, or we lived on adjoining plantations. And so we had to get out that mindset of just wanting to research our direct ancestors, research everyone, the fan method.
Yeah.
We call that the crew with Black Progeny.
Yeah, and in Black genealogy, it's the crew.
We call it the crew, right? And let me go ahead and big up the youngin because he's right. And this is a hallmark of the research that I know, in particular, the Black Progeny and everyone associated with Black Progeny. It is something that we are big proponents of because, in my experience, while I have 2 direct ancestors who were in the Civil War in terms of their, being enlisted, I have multitudes of other cousins and uncles and other people who were part of the effort that, had I not ordered their pensions or looked into their service, I would not have found my people. And so, in my opinion, and I think I could speak for Shelley B. Murphy, myself, the future of genealogy is in community research. And the quicker you get to understanding that and I'm just going to say it, we are both members of DAR, but one of the unfortunate aspects of lineage societies is that it makes people focused on me search and not research. Your direct line, my patriot, my ancestor, my line, we know that we still operate in community. This space that we are in right now is in community. 100 years from now, your descendants are going to be trying to find out why Shelley, Nicka, and Darius and Whitney were all together in a virtual space together.
Absolutely.
And if they do community era research or community research, they will understand this has something to do with genealogy. Nicka knows Shelley from Black Progeny genealogy. Nicka knows Darius from engaging at the museum, and the same thing with Whitney. So you have to think of your ancestors in that same way. We are beyond my patriot, my line. That is over. That is genealogy 2.0. What we are focused on is the dash between the birth and the death dates of our ancestors and filling in the context around their lives during that dash. And the longer you stay in me search, you ain't gonna find nothing.
And it limits to what you're finding. And also, you guys cited the records. We talked about pensions. And for each of you, I know there's something in a pension record. And again, for those that are new to genealogy that might be tuning in, that would have been what they could apply for. And they had to put in go to the courthouse, I'm going to say it this way, and say, I served, in this unit, this time frame. And because they were able to, and I'm talking about African Americans, receive a pension for their service. And so within these records, and I'm going to say it's the butter on the bread. And if you guys will share what you have seen in some of these pension records, not only talking about somebody else, but what else is up in that pension record. And Darius, I'll throw it to you first and then let Nicka take it.
So the pension files are a gold mine. They truly are a gold mine. And so what I've been able to do, I've actually been able to reconstruct plantations by ordering so many pension files. Many of the witnesses were people that these people were formerly enslaved with. So because this person did not have a marriage certificate to prove that one night they jumped the broom one Saturday night, these people needed witnesses. And so you get tons of witnesses. And then you always get at least in my case, many of the people that gave the names of the slave owners. And that's key because that's how you go from researching once we were free to that enslavement era. There's no such thing as researching enslaved African Americans without knowing the white family. And that's the pension files freely gives that information, assuming the person has a deposition. And many people, like Nicka said, many people spend their entire lives, 20, 30 years, just trying to find out one slave owner. And these pension files, you get it right in the first couple of sentences. Hey, I was born on Combahee River. My master was Arthur Blake. And then you got 5 witnesses and they all saying the same thing. And then you get some people saying, this is my cousin, you know?
Yeah.
And so now I decide to research this person's descendants to see if I find their descendants on my DNA test. And then guess what? I find their descendants on my DNA test. All this is being confirmed. And so community research, like Nicka said, that's so helpful because they were a community and they always saw themselves as a community. And so we should always do the same thing.
It's always who's around them.
Yep, who's
Nicka?
around them.
Oh, I mean, do we have enough time for what's in a pension? Because
Give
I
me a
don't
bullet
necessar-
list. Get the share.
Right, like I'm like you over here asking this big question. Pictures, because
Yes.
sometimes the men was allegedly married to more than one woman at a time. So when the examiner went around, they had to say, is this so-and-so or is this the wife? So sometimes you'll find photos. I've seen handwritten letters. I've seen from the soldier themselves or someone on their behalf. One of my most prized possessions is when my great-great-great-grandmother passed away. My great-great-aunt wrote a letter to the pension bureau asking for money to pay for her services. But she said exactly the time she died, where she died, with the address, all of that. It was all in her own handwriting. You'll find the depositions, even gross stuff like, I didn't want to know that Ike Rogers suffered from chronic diarrhea, but that's in his pension because he had to go and get a medical examination. So you're going to find medical examinations.
And that was the most common thing they died from.
Right. Was chronic diarrhea. Yeah. You will even, to me, the most endearing part of those depositions. You cannot and the reason why I say this is because there are a few times in history where Black people are asked questions and they get to respond.
Yes.
Just plain. Do you know Shelley Murphy? How do you know Shelley Murphy? How old are you? Where do you live? What is your job? When did you come into contact with Shelley during her service? Do you remember her getting married? No one was going around freely asking questions of regular Black folks. In fact, today, in the year 2024, they don't even go about asking Black folks these questions about their lives. So the fact that we have these depositions alone is, I mean, oh my gosh, I've seen funeral receipts. I have a receipt for my 3rd great grandmother's funeral. I know how much the hearse cost. Right. I know how much the casket was, the shroud. Did they give y'all shrouds? Did y'all have a shroud at yours for your receipts?
No,
They had a shroud. I don't know what the shroud was for, but I mean, anything that was in relating, I would even say, I'm just thinking very broadly outside of the depositions, the write-ups from the examiners sometimes are incredible, where they're passing it, or the notes, so like passing it from one examiner to the next. And so there'll be a synopsis on like where the case is. And sometimes the examiners y'all already know. Come on now, Darius. Right. They own something. And sometimes they're not. I have a pension file where an examiner was, and this is for the first Kansas, because I did the same thing where I pulled more than 20 of them for people in the same company. So these are individuals who were fighting side by side with my ancestor.
Yeah.
And it was really just to see if he was a witness for them or if there was additional information. And one of the things that I found in one of the synopses in those files was the examiner talked about how Black folks in the Indian Territory were better off than white people there.
Oh,
I said, who is this? Then it made me want to research the examiner. Like, what are you doing? Were you an abolitionist? You know, like yeah. Just here's the other thing about pensions. Be prepared for it to be little and be prepared for it to be voluminous.
yes. Yes.
We don't know. It could be either one of those. I've seen 10 pages and I've seen 500.
Yep.
So let me make 2 comments. Pensions you can order from the National Archives. That's one place. Fold 3 is another online database that people could get. And people in the chat, if you know that link, share it, put it in there, another resource. But also, I want to say another thing, and I'll let Darius talk about the Center for Family History and their role in the USCT pension records. But I also want to say something about that content. You are hearing their voice, number one. They're telling this in this application or filing of the pension, but also the history that's brought in there of where they were at, what battles and things like that. And now you can start building that story because you're getting where I'm from, who I was with, who's my family, and what I contributed. And these type things are not totally, and I'm going to say totally because there is Civil War museums throughout, but again, the service in, the contributions that were made, even if it was the cook or whoever, it was there and they were involved. So again, you've got different sources that are out there. And another place to look is to check WikiTree and find out and look for the county and find out if there's United States colored troops there. So there's a lot of resources that we're sharing. And let me see, and again, people are posting in the chat box, which are excellent. And I want to say, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A because we'll get to them in about 5 minutes. Okay, so another question coming. This is about that recognition and remembrance. Despite the crucial contributions, and we've hearing that, African Americans, participants in the Civil War, have often been overlooked in historical narratives. We're seeing a little more coming out, but us in this world, as genealogists and researchers, we're going to seek that out. But how can we ensure that these stories and sacrifices are adequately recognized and remembered? What can we do as the descendant or as the community or who? What can we do to make sure this happens and gets out there? Nicka?
I think first and foremost, and this is ironic because this is a conversation I was having with a friend of mine via chat this morning.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most immeasurable asset that Black people have is our culture and our history. Mm. And I think often yes, you need financial resources to live and survive and to move throughout this life, but we don't recognize how important and how much wealth we have in our culture and our history. And as a result of that, we don't see that as something that should be actively passed around freely at that. And so I think the way that we preserve this is we arm ourselves and we arm our children and we arm our families with the knowledge of, especially in the realm of what we're talking about, which is our ancestors' involvement in the Civil War. We arm ourselves with that information, so that when they start teaching on this subject in schools, your child or your children or your grandchildren can stand up proudly and say, Well,
Yeah.
my great-great-great-grandfather was in the 1st Kansas Colored Infantry, which became the U.S. Colored Troops 79th Regiment. He was in Company E. He was among the first to enlist in Mound City on August 10th, 1862, that your child or that your family members can confidently walk in that and say, when we get to these commemorations next year, because let me go ahead and throw this out there, next year is the 160th anniversary of a lot of things. It's the 160th anniversary of the end of the Civil War.
That's
We
right.
all, those of us that have proven this or are on the hunt to find it, even those of you who are here who have yet to find a Civil War veteran, be out there in your conversations, at your job, at your church, at the grocery store, shouting out these nearly 200,000 people who were a part of this effort. Because the longer we keep silent, we diminish their roles. And our inheritance is in our history and us actively passing it down. And when we choose to block that blessing to future generations and to the rest of our family, because there are some of us who keep this information locked up and guarded like we own it.
Yeah, and it goes to the grave with them.
Yeah.
Some of it goes
Right.
to the grave. Yes. Darius, any comment there?
And what I wanted to say is, I feel like we have to do a better job of getting these stories up out of our elders. It's too many times that we let them go to the grave and they don't say anything. And that's what my book is all about. That's why I call it At the Feet of the Elders, because it was always a time
Yeah.
growing up where I was sitting down on the porch with my great grandparents or my grandparents, and they were telling me these stories. You know, my great grandfather saying my grandfather was a sergeant in the 1st South Carolina. His wife saying my great granddaddy fought in the Civil War too. And we have to get these stories out of them so that we can pass it on to the next generation. And so that's one thing that I feel like we have to do a better job of doing. And so one thing else that I want to talk about is I want to make sure that I pass this on to my family members, and so that's why I wrote a book. And so right in my book, you know, my relatives. This isn't my research. This is our story. Okay, I did the research, but this is everybody's story in the family. Everyone can read the book and they can learn something about their family history. And so I feel like, you know, we should write books. You know, it don't have to be a mainstream book. It could be a little journal or something. Pass it out to the family members so that
At a
they,
family reunion or something.
yeah,
Yes.
many people not even having family reunions no more, you
That
know,
part,
that
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 part.
part. So we have to do a better job with preserving this history.
Yes.
Well, and can I also add, don't wait until someone dies or till you have a reunion.
There you
Right.
go.
Because there are too many tools that we have among us to do the storytelling. Let's
it's
say
being
your
shared.
skill, because some people are intimidated. Like Darius, for us, we don't care. We can sit and write forever. But some people, it's hard.
Yeah.
Like for them to put pen to paper. And so maybe their gifting is to sit down with their phone and record the voices.
Yeah.
Maybe someone else's gifting is to is to make beautiful journals for the elders, for them to handwrite this information down into if they can't get to them. Maybe it's because you have a Zoom account, you create a meeting and you give the phone number to the elders and you record the meeting, as opposed to, the other part is, don't expect for the Nicka and Darius in your family to do this alone.
Right. It's a family
or whoever
affair.
else is here. Right.
Yeah.
Or whoever else is here. It takes a community to lift this up. Darius, as a young person, shouldered the financial responsibility of ordering those pensions and paying for them. He ain't gonna say it, but I'm gonna say it. Y'all know that I'll stay getting on people for having an expectation that folks do this and finance it on their own. And it can be expensive, especially if, he's drivable to the National Archives if he wanted to. I'm not. I have to hop on a plane or I have to pay a service. And so, in my opinion, along with preserving, writing the books, creating the blogs, making a podcast, recording the audio, taking the pictures of people, we have to also think about the contingency plan about where this information goes once all of us are not here. Because one thing I do know is that there are people who actively scavenge thrift shops.
Yes.
And find
Goodwill.
or discover, heirlooms, things that people have left behind because there's no contingency plan for all of these things that we're saying. So
Yeah.
just again, I know this is a lot to think about and consider, but also think about perhaps establishing something beyond your life for where this information is going to go. Yes, our books and things that we've written is one way, but we also have to make sure we protect the intellectual property of our family, because somebody could come around later and discover it.
Absolutely. And I want to follow up on the part about writing the book or whatever it is, a journal or whatever you're doing. And I'm looking at the quote on my desktop over here. And I'm start putting this out. And it comes from what both of you are saying. Harley Davidson, who you all kind of know, the motorcycle guy. This is a quote of his. When writing the story of your life, don't let someone else hold the pen. You've got to do this. It might be you're the chosen one, and we have this thing about the storytellers in the family. And again, not everybody's going to love all this genealogy, but the ones that might not engage might know something. And again, this is the opportunity to talk to the elders in your family. But I have this other term I call the house repository. Everybody got one, has one. Auntie's house, grandmama's house, great grandmama's house. There could be pictures, documents, letters, anything. You got to ask. You got to engage in this dialogue with your family. So again, we heard about pension records, where you can order them at and things like that. Plus, you got social media out there also. Get in the groups and find out if it's a U.S. colored troop, or a Civil War group. Start interacting in that world and start networking. And again, what you learn, then you share. Okay. And so I want to bring one other thing to the table here. And it's one of my favorite collections. And I know it's also one of Nicka's as well. And for the research, we know there's this myth out there that says that African Americans cannot find their people before the 1870 federal population census. So number one, that's one point, that's a myth that's out there. Number two, there's a record collection of 3.5 million records. Number three, and I'll let y'all mention that. And then you just got to go for it from there, because they're rich, they're there, and they're free to access. So Nicka, I'll let you take it from there about that record prior to 1870, because this is also a passion for a lot of us genealogists, because we know there's 3.5 million. And I will say, Nicka, and for folks in the chat, there is an excellent ancestry.com, and it's on YouTube. And if you want to mention about Hawkins Wilson, and we'll make sure that gets into the chat, people can go listen to that. And that also ties to that collection. So I'll let you have it from there.
I love all the little Easter eggs you just gave me, like we in the front yard and I got to go and find them. I hope Darius saw that his were purple. So she's talking about the Freedmen's Bureau, which is, again, it's a part of what I call the trifecta of trying to unearth the identities of our ancestors prior to slavery ending. And with the Freedmen's Bureau, there's a direct correlation or a direct connection back to the U.S. colored troops that we've been talking about, because the Freedmen's Bureau was over certain operations for the U.S. colored troops during and after the war, like making sure they got their bounty payments, or think of it as like a bonus, sign-on bonus, where they would get $300 for enlisting. You are going to find U.S. colored troops in the Bureau. And so that's one way of getting that. And the Bureau operated in states that were practicing chattel slavery. Of course, that's going to be most of the lower South. And so that collection is available on Ancestry. It's more than 3 million, 3.5, it's 3.7, because additional indexing has been done on Ancestry that is not available anywhere else. Got to make sure folks know that. So in addition to U.S. colored troops, you're going to find records like labor contracts where formerly enslaved people were being paid for their labor. A lot of times, whoever the landowner was could have been their former slaveholder or the family member of a former slaveholder. You're finding apprenticeships. We can go on for days and have an entire other webinar about the Freedmen's Bureau. And then in reference to the film, it's a film called A Dream Delivered, The Lost Letters of Hawkins Wilson, that specifically details one story in the Freedmen's Bureau, but there are scores of others that are just like it, of people seeking to be reunited with their family members at the end of enslavement. And so you can just type in A Dream Delivered on YouTube or go to
We've got it in the
ancestry.com/.
chat, Karen K.
Black History, and you'll find it there. And yeah, trying to think of what else. I mean, those are Civil War veterans and the Freedmen's Bureau, again, are two of the paramount ways that you can identify your ancestors, slaveholders, as well as find out more about their lives prior to 1870. But I also want to encourage everybody who was here to recognize that 5 years happened before 1870. And if you can't find your ancestors as a U.S. colored troop, if you can't find them in the Freedmen's Bureau, you owe it to them and to yourselves and to your research project to try to dig into their lives at the local level. And you have no idea what you will find until you get there. So don't neglect going to the courthouse or going to the state archives to unearth that 5 years beforehand.
And historical societies, and don't leave out the public libraries.
Yeah.
Another source. Darius?
Yeah, the Freeman Bureau records is so helpful, especially for me, because we had a field office right in Beaufort. And then we also had another one on Hilton Head Island. And so you, like Nicka said, you will see labor contracts, you see marriage records. And marriage records are very important because many of these people didn't have a marriage certificate to prove they were married during slavery. And so I remember this one teacher during the Civil War in Beaufort. She came down with the New England Freedmen Aid Society, and she talks about it in her biography, how there was people who were formerly enslaved. They had been married long time ago, but they got remarried again just so they can get a marriage certificate. And those labor contracts also have clues in it. Just like Nicka said, the person that they formed the labor contract with potentially could have been the former owner. Many of these people didn't have any money once they were freed. And so often, they will form a contract with the person who just formerly enslaved them. And so, you can see your ancestors whenever they went to the hospital, the contraband hospital. At least I know we had one here in Beaufort because many contrabands were escaping from the outskirts and within Beaufort. And so they were receiving health services and stuff like that. But it's many ways that you can get past 1870. And like I mentioned earlier, you can't do everything online. A lot is online, but it gets to a point where you have to make that trip to the archives, to the local library. I remember when I first got started, the local library and some of the archives that was nearby, I was always there, and so there's plenty of ways that you can get past 1870. But 1870, our history don't begin there. It's way before then.
And also think about people that were enslaved. They were people before they were labeled,
Right.
enslaved or became property. They were people before that, and there's families prior to that. So I've got another question to throw out to you all. And how do each of you have your stuff kind of organized, or how do you hold your records that you're finding? We heard Darius talk about pensions, 23. Nicka, I know where you're at in a number, and again, we've both been doing this a long time, but share something that's a clue to how you maintain your files. I'll say that. And for people that might just be getting started, because we know organization is key. And the reason I say that is because a lot of us, because we got the stacks, we got the binders, we got the folders, we got the bags, and this, that, and other. But share a tip to the audience, and I'll come back to you too, Darius, on the same thing. Just give us a tip that could help people in doing this. And I know I'm thinking of your TRAS 250, where there's thousands involved in that. And I'm saying thousands that have names with them. So that means there's even more coming down from that. So please share some of that information.
I think you only really effectively organize when you establish your intent early. What are you after?
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds probably a little cockamamie because some people say, well, everything. Okay, that's nice. But you will lose your focus quickly if you don't establish your intent and what you're seeking to find out. And what do I mean by that? Establish your questions early. Maybe at the onset, it's these top three. I want to find this line as enslaved people. I want to validate that we're Native American. I want to do whatever your three questions are, establish your intent. And then from there, you then organize based on what that is. For me personally, if you're looking at my computer and the way that I have files saved, I have them, 4 folders, one for each grandparent. And then within those folders are the great grandparents. And then within those folders are the great great grandparents. I have everything separated out very granularly that way. For with Trash 250, I'm very specific. All the obituaries are in a folder. All of the death certificates are in a folder. I have it set up that way. But the other thing is my main system of keeping track of this information is in a family tree. And I use an online family tree. I use Ancestry, but then I also use Family Tree Maker because I'm dealing with information for close to 9,000 people. And so I have to be able to maneuver between this, Henry Trask and that Henry Trask and have my timeline straight. One is born in 1835 and the other one is born in 1850. You need timelines. You need to be clear about who is where. There was a question in the chat around someone having a very common family surname and ancestors living in a couple of different counties. So how do I know which regiment? Well, you've got to know who was alive when. When we're talking about men who are of age to have served in the Civil War, we're talking about people born between around 1811 and 1848. And who's alive at that specific time? Who was alive to have been enslaved? If you're finding somebody on the 1870 census and they're born prior to the year 1870, you've traced before 1870.
Right.
Because you can't be on it.
And everybody got parents.
Right.
Everybody got parents.
Right. And even a baby technically is tracing before. That 6-month-old baby is tracing before. Yeah. So you've got to know who was alive and when they were alive and which records, depending on their age, you need to look at. And so just be deliberate and utilize the systems that you have. If you need to use spreadsheets to track this information, use a spreadsheet. If spreadsheets are intimidating for you, create a table in Word. Some people process with putting together PowerPoint decks so they can walk out their thoughts, in a cohesive manner. You utilize the systems that are for you. And here's the thing, let me give you a little bit of freedom. Don't feel like it has to have the word genealogy slapped in front of it in order for it to be a system that you use.
That's right. I'm the word table person.
That's what I'm saying. Look,
and Shelly, I got 35 years of research and I use words.
Right. And you don't like spreadsheets, but I love them. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. That doesn't make Shelly a less proficient or organized researcher than me.
Right.
She just knows how she operates. I like to listen. Books, I love books, but now I've gotten to the place where I like to listen to them. So I like them on audio so that I can finish them. You got to really, in some ways, this takes you back to school and how you are as a learner and how you were as a student. And if you know that there were certain blocks that you had as a result of how you were taught to operate as a student or how to research, then this is the time as an adult that you can do it on your terms and shake it up and have it organized and process it in whatever way, shape, or form. But I can't help you if you're a pack rat. I can't answer that question. I can't do that.
It's got to be organized. Darius, how do you organize your stuff? And by the way, the spreadsheets equal math, and math is my weak subject. And that's
I'm not doing math either. I live in Spotlight doing math.
And just like Nicka said, a person has to do it the way that they're more comfortable with. So if you're a person and you like math or whatever, and you like spreadsheets, then maybe you might want to do Google Sheets or something like that. I have Google Sheets and I also do Word. But do what's comfortable for you. But in the beginning, you have to have that research question. Why am I doing this? And so once you answer that question, then you can organize your research in that way. And so with me, when I got started, my goal was to trace, even though it seemed to be a little overly optimistic, But I want to find out the ship that one of my ancestors came back on, came to America on. And I did find that information. And so I had my research organized. You can do color-coded folders to represent different branches of your family or however you want to do it, whatever you're comfortable with, but make sure that you organize in your research and stuff like that. And then you also want to have timelines. And then, so like on ancestry.com, I believe they will give you an error message if you have the children older than the parents. And so
It does.
Yep.
there's no reason why that I should see trees and this person has the children older than the parents.
Yes.
We have to understand timelines. And so when you have timelines, you will understand who was where at this point, or when was this person married. If this person died then we know this isn't him after this record. So just make sure you have timelines and stuff like that, and making sure that you're just being organized.
And our brains like the chronological order that a timeline tool gives you. So if you're starting, I always leave the first couple lines blank for parents and then start with whatever ancestor I'm getting ready to track, and starting off with the birth. And again, anything that has happened, I probably need to do a thing on timelines because that's my little specialty thing that I like doing, but it creates some organization to the folders. Like you said, I can also hand that off to family members.
Yep.
And it might be that I need help. And I'm
Right.
saying, look through this. I've got, say, 1740 and right up to where I'm at now in 2023, 2024, and say, what am I missing? Any questions, or what do you know? And again, summing this up, we've talked a lot about Civil War, USCTs, and the last question, and then we'll go to the open Q&A. If there are some in the Q&A box, we'll let Whitney handle that. But I have a question. How does the legacy of African Americans in the Civil War resonate in today's discussions about race, equality, and civil rights in the United States? And Nicka, I'll hand that over to you.
I think the opening question that you had in the opening discussion, to me, it ties directly to this, where we were talking about the multitude of roles that people had and the fact that some of them were documented and some of them were not. When you start looking and you start quantifying the amount of people who were involved in the Civil War effort, and when you move into later conflicts like World War I and World War II in Vietnam, the numbers exponentially grow. And you cannot separate US history from Black folks' involvement in our conflicts. You cannot. We've been there in every single one.
Everyone.
And so with that said, in my opinion, we're inextricably tied to the history and the foundation of our nation. And what we know through data is that the youngest generation that is out there now is the most diverse this country has ever had. And so they're going to have ancestors who may be on both sides of the conflict. There may be people who are watching right now whose ancestors were on both sides of the conflict. And so because of the nature of that diversity, we also have to expand out how we discuss the roles of folks. We talked about abolitionists and the fact that they played an active role and were in leadership roles within the U.S. colored troops as well as the Freedmen's Bureau. We have to broaden how we storytell around this. And the other thing is, we also have to recognize that the story dies when we don't tell it. And it doesn't sustain itself when we don't tell it. And so there have been a lot of conversation, and there's been a lot of conversation in the chat around establishing a repository and doing all that. That takes time, it takes resources, it takes energy. But one of the things that I know that each of us can do as individuals is focus on our own tree, focus on our immediate stuff, things that we have within our control that we can handle. And when those larger projects potentially come to the fore, and they come and they stay, or they may go away, because that's one of the biggest problems we have in our community is sustaining this type of thing. Focus on your area. what you have influence on and what you can control, be very intentional in that. And then we can do things in a mass. But the more we focus on collective, I think it disheartens and it also intimidates people, and it makes them feel like they won't ever attain this. Do not look at me, at Darius, and think that we have all the answers and we have all of our lines of family going back to Methuselah. We don't.
No.
We had to start somewhere, just like you. We both didn't have no money for subscriptions at one point either. You use what you have available to you. Go to the library if you can go to your local library, come to the Center for Family History at the museum if you need to utilize that, get in contact with their staff, sign up for a consultation, do any of those things that you need to do, but mind your well first.
Darius?
Yeah. One thing that I would like to say, and I always tell people, is that just by looking at the Civil War, at least for me, and seeing the amount of ancestors that served, it showed me that they just didn't care about their own lives, but the lives of other people. And I like people. I would want people to know that, we should all be comfortable with the history of our ancestors. None of us should be ashamed of what they went through, because they didn't ask to be in those positions and stuff. And so that's why, many people, you have all these ideologies these days. We didn't come from Africa. We always been here. There's no reason why an African American should be saying something like that. And we should all be comfortable with our roots. We should be comfortable with our ancestors coming from Africa. We should be comfortable with them going through chattel enslavement. It showed that they were resilient. It showed that, although despite all these things that they went through, that they were still able to come out on the other side. And so we should, we do them a disservice when we don't tell this, when we don't tell their, I hear
Their
background.
story.
Yeah, their stories. Now I was hearing feedback in the back, but
Yeah.
we do the service when we don't tell their stories and stuff like that. And so be comfortable with your ancestors' stories and tell them to the next generation. No one should be ashamed that their great grandmother, she was a house servant or something like that. That's part of our history, and my great grandfather, I have an ancestor. He was a servant for the slave owner, but guess what? He also fought in the Revolutionary War. I can tell that to my kids or my grandchildren one day. Although, his freedom was taken away from him, he did some extraordinary things throughout his life. He also went to the Philadelphia Convention, and so we can take the mess that was given to us and we can turn it into a positive.
Did either of you want to share? Did you have any slides or anything you wanted to share right quickly? And I know some of the questions have been answered. There's a couple more coming up. But if you had anything, if you had any examples you want to share, if not, we'll move on to the Q&A.
Yeah, go ahead, Shelley. I'm sorry.
Nope, I was just gonna say Nicka.
What I was gonna share in terms of slides was really just to kind of bring it back home in terms of like how to get to the information and what's there. Really as a call to action for folks. People they get intimidated by Civil War research, and I think me and Darius have been very clear, and you as well, Shelley, that when you get to a service record, that's not the end of the road. When you get to a pension card, that's not the end of the road. In fact, it's the beginning of the road. And once you know that, and you know that there are additional records associated with it, then that's what you should be focused on. So quickly, and I'm sure Darius, you're sharing examples, right?
I had like a few slides.
Okay. Well, I'm just asking because you're going to wrap up with the example. So we good. All right. What are you looking for Civil War birth years between 1811 and 1848? Okay. Do not look for Civil War veteran for somebody who was born in 1865. That child was not old enough. Okay. Do not look earlier than someone born in 1811. Why? That man was too old. They weren't going to have no man with no cane out on a battlefield. Okay, so keep that in mind. We've been talking about context. 1890 veteran schedules. You also have 1910 census column 30 specifically asks whether somebody is a survivor of the Union or Confederate Army or Navy. Look for a code. If it says UN, that is Union Navy. If it says UA, that's Union Army. As opposed to CA, which is Confederate Army, and CN, which is Confederate Navy. From there, you're also looking at things like we talked about, service records, or some people will call them muster cards. These are cards, you can find them on Fold 3 and Ancestry, that will tell you the person's age, their birth location, height, weight, where they enlisted, who enlisted them, and even remarks. They'll also, the successive cards, because that's the other thing people do is they stop at the first one, keep going. They were paid, underpaid, because we haven't even talked about that. The fact that U.S. colored troops, regardless of them having the same experience, were paid $3 less than white troops who were in the federal army. They got paid less. There's a pay disparity. So you're going to look at those bi-monthly pay cards that follow that initial descriptive card. You're also going to look at pension cards. The pension card, the regiment and the company should match what is on the service card. If it says U.S. Colored Troops 79th Regiment, Company E on the pension, the service card should match that. If it doesn't, you're dealing with two completely different people. Always make sure to double check and go over your information. If we're talking Confederates, which we haven't spent a lot of time talking about today, but there are some individuals who were forced into service for the Confederacy. They have Confederate payrolls for the formerly enslaved whose slaveholders forced them basically into service. Now, how do you get to the records? Confederate pension applications and lists are local. They are not held with the federal government, okay? They are usually at the state archives from the state in which the units were organized. You also may have oral history. Darius talked about his great-grandparents mentioning their family members or their ancestors who were in the Civil War. There may be mentions in other documents that somebody was a veteran of the late war. You might find an obituary in the newspaper that says someone was a veteran of the late war or involved in the Civil War. Take that as information. Be prepared for name changes. Your ancestor may have enlisted under one name, but went by another name after the war. Some people were saying, well, how do I have someone on 1890 and they also answered on 1910 or vice versa or neither of those, but they have a military issued headstone. Take the information from the headstone, look in the service cards, look in the pension cards to see if you can find them. Browse the whole regiment because they may be in there under a different name than you know them under. Why would they have an alias? They were scared.
Yes.
They thought somebody would come and get them. That's why.
Yes.
Browse. Another tip, make sure you browse the whole regiment and the company. Darius talked about having a lot of people in the same community enlisting, and you might find other family members simply by browsing the service cards or by browsing the pension cards. So go through the whole regiment. Don't stay on that me search. Go to the crew and look at the community. Again, these pensions are not all digitized, okay? They're not. You can look at them on site. You can hire someone to go to the National Archives. There's been a link placed in the chat for a few different services that people can utilize. There are some that are online where people have already gone to the National Archives and scanned them. They're available in the National Archives catalog. There are selected ones on Fold 3. There's a bevy of them at the International African American Museum and on the website for the Center for Family History. And there are some other websites where people have uploaded the pension files that they've ordered. But again, the large, vast majority of these records are not digitized and available from home. You're going to have to engage with them at the National Archives.
All right.
Now, passing it to you, Darius.
All right. Share my screen.
And I love that picture behind him. If people haven't recognized, I had to ask him who it was. At first, I thought that was the Yorktown and end of the war, but it's not. It's South Carolina. But go ahead, Darius.
All right. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
It's good.
Okay, so this is something a little short, but this is found inside the South Atlantic Blockading Squadron, and this quote always stuck with me. But it says, "As soon as we took a slave from his claimant, We placed a musket in his hand, and he began to fight for the freedom of others. And that's what I've been talking about the entire time on this webinar, that these people put their lives on the line so that they can fight for the freedom of others and stuff like that. And to give a little background information about the picture that's behind me, that was actually when the first South Carolina received their Stars and Stripes on January 1st, 1863. And as you know, in the Gullah community, they do watch night service going into the New Year's. Many of these people there did the same thing before. And so people came from tiny islands that people don't even know about. They all came to Beaufort to hear if they would be freed, and also for the first South Carolina to receive their Stars and Stripes. But this is the picture that I made from AI. I like it. They look bad, you know, they look, they was ready to kick some behind. But this is actually from the South Atlantic Blockading Squadron. This is one of the reports. This is when Harriet Tubman and the Second South Carolina and a branch of the Third Rhode Island, they went up the Combahee River and they saved over 700 people. But he says, I have the honor to report that in obedience to your orders, I proceeded up the Combahee River with the steamers John Adams and Harriet A. Weed, with a detachment of 300 men on the 2nd South Carolina Volunteer Regiment. Now, these are all Black soldiers now who did this raid.
Awesome.
And a section of the 3rd Rhode Island Battery, commanded by Captain Charles Ray Brayton. We ascended the river some 25 miles, destroyed a pontoon bridge together with a vast amount of cotton, rice, and other property, and brought away 725 slaves and some fine horses. And many of these people that they brought back from the Combahee River raid, they enlisted into the 2nd South Carolina. They enlisted, and so they got saved, and then they said, you know what, let me go back out, and I want to save some people.
Yes, awesome.
And this actually hits on one of the first questions that you asked. What was the role that many African Americans played in the Civil War? But I always think about the women that served as nurses and stuff like that. And I have a cousin. She's one of my main characters in my book. Her name is Penda Blake. But Penda Blake, she served inside the Contraband Hospital in Beaufort. And she talks about it in her pension file when she applied for her husband's pension. But she was like a one-of-a-kind woman because she actually followed her husband to the different places that they went to during his army service. And so she says Peter then went to working on the government wharves and stayed about 3 months when he was put into the regiment. I saw him and was with him right along while the regiment was on Hilton Head. I worked in the hospitals when the regiment left there, and he would send for me to come to him, and when he could. I went to him at Mount Pleasant, Morris Island, and other places. And so this picture does represent all the Black women that served as nurses in the Civil War, those that we don't know about. Many of us know about Harriet Tubman, but I feel like we all should find the Harriet Tubmans within our own families. And I found plenty of them, and I'm pretty sure that you can find those in your family too. That's pretty much it.
All right. Thank you for that. Thank you. So I want to reach out to the museum. Are there any questions from the folks that are in the museum? And then I'll come and get you, Whitney. Do you see questions from the museum? Because I know that's where you're at, and I'll let you go.
They've been putting it in the Q&A box.
Okay. Okay.
One of the questions is, did women actually fight in the Civil War, and are there any records for them?
Can I, before that gets answered, next Saturday at 1 o'clock is about Black women in the Civil War. So I would say hold that question and come back next week. We will have Angela Walton Raji. We will also have True Lewis and possibly Joyce Ann Gray, who were actually served in the Army, and they're going to share about their research and things. And of course, Angela, as Nicka mentioned, will be talking about nurses, matrons, laundresses, and cooks, but just the Black women and their role in the Civil War. So I'm going to ask that we skip that because that's next Saturday.
then this one, Darius, and you can answer it, and you kind of led to it, but is the museum still a words today don't work. Repository for sharing pension files?
Is
So
the
are
museum?
we collecting them or
Yeah, so the pension file
Wow.
project is still going on right now.
Mhm.
We're currently still ordering the remaining pension files from the National Archives. So we got funding to order 1,000. We have slightly over 700 right now, and so that's actually how I got started with the museum. Those pension files add up. So I remember buying the first 4 pension files, and I was like, $320. I was like, man, I can't do this no more. And so I happened to see the Center for Family History they had a pension file project, and that's how I got in contact with Tony Carrier, and at the time and stuff like that. So yeah, we are collecting pension files, and
From the public as well. If
yeah,
you
from
have
the public
some,
as well.
share them, but no, we're going to be putting them up so people can see them.
Yeah. Mhm.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is it just South Carolina?
No,
Yeah.
it's everybody.
Somebody had to ask, because people would
Absolutely,
naturally make
no.
the assumption that it was just South Carolina.
Yeah, no, it's everybody. We will take if you give. Whitney?
And what are your thoughts on the 10 million names project?
Should I be responding to that or one of you two? I think I better take this question. I can look at Nicka. The 10 Million Names Project is it's an initiative. It's kind of getting underway. They're not there yet, but the idea is they're looking for people to join in, sign on, and I'm going to say contribute to the research. So they are looking to try to document as many of the 10 million formerly enslaved people and down to the descendants. So you can visit the website, and they have, genealogists on staff from American Ancestors who also oversees the GU 272 project. If folks know what GU 272, if not, they can also Google that as well. But again, the 10 Million Names Project is about getting up to 10 million names of formerly enslaved people into a database. And there might be more than one database, but the goal right now is to create a database where this information would be at. So did I do good, Nicka? Okay, Whitney.
Then someone was wondering if they could get a copy of the PowerPoints that were used today near the end of the discussion, the slides that both of y'all showed.
You talking about ours? Oh, their PowerPoint slides?
I think they're meaning theirs because it came up near the end when they were being shown.
Yeah, but they'll be able to watch the recording, so they will see them. And I'm sorry, I'm speaking for you two, but on the recording, you will be able to see those slides. And the recording will be up within the next couple of weeks on the YouTube channel for the museum, on the Center for Family History.
And then this is a follow-up question to the 10 million names. And it goes, how is the 10 million names different from Ancestry or Family Search?
Totally different.
How?
Say it that way. So and what I'm saying somewhat, because I don't know if Ancestry or Family Search has 10 million names in their databases. They have
do.
names and documents.
They do.
Yeah, they probably do.
They do. Well, let me help you pivot here, because I think the underlying question is whether or not there are repositories that are similar to what 10 million names is proposing that are similar in scope. The short answer to that is yes. There are existing projects such as enslaved.org that have been around for a number of years. You can even look at the Transatlantic Slave Trade database that has data on enslaved people who were involved in the transatlantic slave trade. But at the heart of what you're asking now is a follow-up. Family Search and Ancestry do have the names of enslaved people and descendants. Let's also qualify that, because we also don't want to detach ourselves from our connections to those people. Yes, we want to prop them up as enslaved ancestors, but we have to remember that those ancestors create people who are walking around today. So are those names on Ancestry and Family Search? Absolutely they are. But their project, again, is proposing creating a separate database where people pull information in from various sources, including their own trees, to create a sort of primary database of just records for enslaved people. And that's pretty much all I can say.
That's all I'm going to say too.
All right.
Whitney, any more questions in Q&A? Because it is time that we are wrapping up. And again, the video will be available. You'll be able to see the slides if you came in late and things like that. And I hope you all enjoyed it. And thank you to those in the museum. We're saying hi to you. And I hope you enjoyed traveling through the museum, and hope others will take the opportunity to visit the museum in Charleston. I already mentioned about next Saturday at 1 o'clock Eastern time about African-American women in the military, but it will center a little bit of focus on Civil War. And then the following Saturday, excuse me, after that, we'll focus on World War I and World War II. And so again, and also women as well. And so we thank you. I thank you to the presenters today. Appreciate your time. And Whitney, thank you for being here for the support. And I'm going to say hey to Brian and the folks that are there in the museum watching. And everyone have a good afternoon.